From Global, leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, I'm here in Brussels, where the rules of engagement seem to be changing like the shifting sand. Remember at the start of this Brexit process, Sahara, because if you remember at the start of this Brexit process, it was all very clear. It was going to be the 27 member states, represented by the European Commission, negotiating with us. 27 against 1. We weren't allowed to go and speak to other member state governments. They were the battle lines. That's how it was set. But of course, they've blown a hole in that when just a few weeks ago they invited Jeremy Corbyn over, and indeed the leaders of the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly. Well, that today went a lot further. Mr. Corbyn has been here today in Brussels, speaking to the socialist group, meeting other people, and being treated like a rock star. You'd have thought he was at Glastonbury. And why? Well, I think what they're trying to do here is the old game of divide and rule. That's my view, but watching it all at first hand here in Brussels at this summit where all 28 heads of state or leaders of their countries are present is Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor. Theo, talk me through the day.
I've just come down from the European Council up the road where this meeting is taking place, and this crucial dinner, which is due to start around about now, but everything's been delayed just by the fairly boring preparatory talks that were meant to be taking place on defence and migration issues as well. So everything's running behind schedule already. I've just been speaking to a couple of Downing Street officials. It's fairly gloomy. They're not expecting a huge amount. Theresa May is going to have to somehow find a way of persuading the 27 other EU leaders to begin preparatory talks around trade deals, transitional arrangements, because, of course, Michel Barnier and Jean-Claude Juncker are blocking formal discussions because they say that the criteria haven't been met when it comes to Northern Ireland's border, EU citizens' rights, and, of course, the divorce bill. So that's where we are right now. Theresa May arrived. She didn't look particularly comfortable, but this is what she told reporters.
We will be talking about a variety of issues today. I've set out the UK's vision in that Florence speech, and I look forward to discussing that, but also the other key issues, the challenges we share, migration, defence, security, counter-terrorism. These are issues that are shared across Europe, and the UK wants to continue to play a full role cooperating with the EU in dealing with these.
Fairly straightforward statement there from Theresa May. She then went upstairs, and you'll see a picture, I'm sure, in tomorrow's papers of Mrs May surrounded by Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron, the German Chancellor and French President, respectively, whispering in her ear. Read into that what you will.
Aren't the cartoonists going to have some fun with that one?
They certainly are. But this morning, everybody's thunder was stolen by Jeremy Corbyn, who arrived on the 6:47 train from St Pancras, straight into a press conference. He looked like the cat who'd got the cream. And then bilateral talks with Michel Barnier, the EU's chief Brexit negotiator, bilateral talks with the Swedish Prime Minister, the Portuguese Prime Minister, and the Italian Prime Minister. Everybody laid out the red carpet for him.
This was not supposed to happen, was it?
Well, there's some very good reasoning, perhaps, would be the best way of describing it, as to why it's happening. Because many would have thought he had Eurosceptic views. Indeed, he was seen to soft pedal, I think would be fair to say, during the referendum, although he said he voted Remain. I asked him, Nigel, was he here to cause mischief, or was he here to actually do a deal?
Not at all, quite the opposite. I've been a frequent visitor to Brussels over the years. We're here. I've just had a meeting with British Labour MEPs. I'm meeting the Prime Ministers of Sweden and Italy, and I'm meeting Michel Barnier, the chief EU negotiator, with Keir Starmer and Barry Gardiner, and we're setting out our view that we want to have trade access to Europe in the future. We want to protect jobs and working conditions across Britain. We want to protect employment rights, consumer rights, and environmental protections. We're here constructively and positively. That's why we've come.
What he didn't say was he wants to destroy the British government's negotiating position.
Well, I think there's perhaps a wider game being played by Jeremy Corbyn, because, of course, what he wants to do is present this reasonable face where he's going to come in potentially into negotiations. He's going to be very affable, very amenable. He's not going to threaten to walk away if Britain doesn't get what he wants. And then perhaps what he might be hoping is that EU leaders, EU bigwigs, like Mr Juncker and Mr Barnier, turn around and they think, Mr Corbyn's quite a good chap. I think we'd all quite like to do a deal with him.
Yeah.
And then crank up the pressure by resisting any chance of getting on to trade talks, and then that would inevitably potentially bring down the May government. And therefore, it becomes, some might say, within the EU's interests to actually push back on Theresa May, because there's the prospect of Jeremy Corbyn waiting in the wings. And that's why Mr Corbyn was really here. Now, Guy Verhofstadt is the European Parliament's chief Brexit negotiator. He's been very quiet, but I've been speaking to his deputy, Sophie in 't Veld, and she's fairly forthright in her views, Nigel.
Old friend of mine, absolutely.
Let's not waste more time, and let's try, and what I find annoying and worrying is the way that the Tory party, the government, is trying to depict the European Union as, the bogeyman, and we are being difficult and we are being unreasonable. And sorry, first of all, we did our homework immediately. I mean, we cried for a day after the Brexit referendum, then we pulled ourselves together, did our homework, and then we were ready to go. Okay? Then we had to wait for months for the British government to put some serious proposals on the table. Well, half-serious proposals. Now we're still arguing about the procedure. Can we please get on with it? And can the Tory government please stop blaming the European Union? And I mean, we're not the enemy, for heaven's sake.
That was Sophie in 't Veld. The other key intervention, of course, was Antonio Tajani, the European president, who described 20 billion euros in terms of the offer from Theresa May on the divorce bill as peanuts. He's looking at more, 50 to 60 billion euros. And the important thing, Nigel, as you pointed out before we came on air, is that the European Parliament has the right of veto on any deal. And from Theresa May's point of view, and from people like Boris Johnson's point of view, money is such a crucial part of this, because when it came to that £350 million a week that Boris Johnson and the Vote Leave campaign ran so much of their campaign on, if then we're then seen to give the same amount of money or a similar amount of money to the European Union, questions will be asked, well, what's the point? Are we really leaving?
We're not getting a breakthrough, are we, tonight?
No.
There's no prospect of it. And actually, she's going to come home tomorrow having really moved things on not one jot. And does that not lead to... And I mean, let's remember that overnight we've had two former Chancellors of the Exchequer saying it's time, frankly, to walk away. We're whistling in the wind. Does this not begin to see the Eurosceptics in the Tory party start to think that maybe a leadership challenge is the right approach?
You're quite right to point that out, and that will be the train of thought and the direction of travel, to use a bureaucrat's term. But I think December will be the crucial date, and then if there's no deal in December, then really I think that we'll see some movement on that. But the calls are growing within the Conservative Party. We saw that letter from 19 Tory MPs. Mrs May, walk away.
Yep, no, absolutely. Theo, thank you. We'll be with you again tomorrow talking about this stuff, and you'll be on with Nick Ferrari, I guess, first thing in the morning. So what does Mrs May need to say or do in order to break the Brexit deadlock? Well, let me give you some thoughts from me on this before I go to your calls. To begin, today she's been utterly humiliated by the leader of the opposition coming here and being treated like a hero. They're doing it to try and divide our country. They're doing it to try and bring down the government, to get a new Prime Minister who'll do effectively what they want him to do. And the first thing she has to do is to say, enough. This is unreasonable behaviour. Secondly, she needs to tell the European Parliament President, Mr Tajani, who thinks 20 billion sterling as a divorce payment is peanuts, and it should be more like 50 or 60. I think she should tell him to sling his hook, because we don't owe any large sums of money, let alone the crazy amounts he's suggesting. And I would ask her to stop begging for a transition deal, to stop trying to prolong the agony of this for years and years. All effectively, Prime Minister, you'd be asking for is a worse form of EU membership for that period of time. And lastly, and I think crucially, it's becoming absolutely clear to anyone that can see, these people don't want a deal. They delay. They're trying to force us into a position where we hand over large sums of money in return for no guarantees at all. This isn't working. And there's a whole world out there we could be negotiating with that we're not, because we're tied up with this. And I think it's time for a deadline. She says, right, you've got until the end of March, or you've got until June next year to sort this out, or we are walking away. And I tell you, that would hurt European companies and jobs far more than it would the UK's. That's what I think needs to happen, but I'm going to ask Nick in Blackpool, a new caller to this show. Nick, what does she need to do to break this deadlock?
Good evening, Nigel. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for having me on.
Not a
Nigel,
bit.
It's quite clear to me. If we want to achieve Brexit, which you, I, and 17 other million people voted for last June, she needs to walk away. It's as simple as that. And I don't think that, she's going to do that for 1 minute, but that's what she would need to do for us to achieve Brexit. Because there's no such thing as hard Brexit. There's no such thing as soft Brexit. Brexit means Brexit. And the only way to get Brexit, what we voted for on that ballot paper, is to walk away. That it's as simple as that. She, of
course. I mean, Nick, you are quoting the Prime Minister, because she said, didn't she, from the Lancaster House speech back in January of this year through to the somewhat failed general election that she called, that was her phrase, wasn't it? She was looking into the camera and saying, Brexit means Brexit. Do you feel let down by her, Nick?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And obviously I'm not the only person. And the most frustrating thing is, Nigel, is that, our voices, since the referendum, the Brexiteers' voices has been, suppressed so much. I mean, thanks to LBC, who actually have you from your side of the fence on, and it's great. But, if you watch the biased BBC, I've watched it this evening, it's just utter dross and anti-Brexit rhetoric, which they keep coming out with. The only thing which can save us is social media. I mean, that's the only thing which we can't be suppressed on your YouTubes and your tweeting and whatnot. Other than that, the actual press, our voice is gone. It's completely gone.
Well, there are newspapers, Nick. There are newspapers making these arguments too. But I do agree, in general, we're being subjected to a constant diet of negativity, including today, the boss of Goldman Sachs saying he'd just been to Frankfurt and what a great place it was. He'd be spending more time in Frankfurt. Do you know something, Nick? Frankfurt is 11th on the list of ideal locations from which to conduct financial business, and London is the first. And it's just another attempt by the globalists to try and make us change our minds, whether it's Goldman Sachs or Hillary Clinton, and frankly, we need to say enough's enough. Our Prime Minister here needs to say enough's enough. I'm not sure she's really actually got the backbone, the nerve, and the belief in this to do it. You're listening to Nigel Farage exclusively on LBC. It's now 7:15. So, deadlock, and yet we're being asked for more money. 20 billion to leave the EU is being described by the President of the European Parliament as peanuts, and yet, on that very day, when we're talking about big sums of money, with absolutely no sense of irony at all, we see the European Commission putting out a tender for 4,000 bottles of champagne over the course of the next 4 years. They say it's to replenish the depleted stocks that exist here in Brussels in the European institutions of sparkling wine. As I say, no sense of irony at all. I'm told that the EU's wine cellar could be worth many, many millions of euros. Some people have speculated it's as much as 20 million euros. I hope, given that we've been a net beneficiary, a net contributor to this union over all these years, that part of the divorce settlement is Mr. Juncker is going to send us a lot of cases of wine. I don't think so. So, what does Mrs. May have to do to break this deadlock? And I'm going to ask Dennis in Bournemouth to give me the answer.
Hello.
Dennis, good evening.
Yeah, good evening, Nigel. First of all, I'd like to say from my wife and myself how much we admire what you've done in getting the referendum and all the work you've done behind that. So I say that up front.
Thank you.
Yeah, turning to negotiations. Yeah, I've been involved in quite a few negotiations in my time, as many other people have. And a big mistake was made right at the beginning. Because what we allowed the European Union to do was set the agenda. And they set out these three points. The divorce bill, Northern Ireland, and the rights of UK and European citizens. Now, that was a big mistake, because the first thing you do in a negotiation is you mutually agree the agenda. We should have put trade on the agenda on day one. then the standoff we've got at the moment, we'd have had, how many months ago was it? 6 months ago, 9 months ago? We'd have had that standoff then. And we could have sorted it out then. If the EU didn't budge, then we could move to other arrangements, including a no deal or the threat of a new deal. Now, as we see ourselves at the moment, I think we can put that back on the table. We can say, if you don't agree to engage in trade talks now, we'll give you 28 days to think about it. If you refuse to do that, after that 28 days, we'll start to make other arrangements. We don't have to walk out. Yeah.
So Dennis, I mean, what I said on my thoughts on this is we should put a deadline down, and that's exactly what you're suggesting, isn't it?
Very much
say
so.
We've got X amount of time to sort this out.
Yeah, and trade talks go on the agenda. There's no agreement on the divorce bill. That can come far later. Why should we agree a divorce bill now when we don't know the implications of a trade deal that we have not yet got?
Well, Dennis, we'd be absolute mugs to do that, wouldn't we? Absolute mugs to do that. But they don't want to shift and put trade on the agenda because they're playing a game with us, aren't they? And unless we give them a deadline, unless we say, look, unless you start talking about this, unless we reach agreement on this, we're going to walk. If we don't do that, they'll keep playing this game, Dennis, for months and months, and lo and behold, they've got Jeremy Corbyn involved now.
Well, I've heard a bit about from Keir Starmer, isn't it, and Starmer, Corbyn. I mean, their position is, in negotiating terms, is frankly ridiculous. If you enter a negotiation and you say right at the beginning of the negotiation, whatever happens, we're going to do a deal. Well, you're not.
Of course. It's absolutely crackers. Dennis, do you think our Prime Minister has the backbone, the will, and the resolve to do what you and I both think she needs to do?
Well, on the basis of current evidence, and we can think back to the election, how she performed on that as well, I think the answer has to be no. I think we have a problem here with leadership. The country needs leadership. We're not being provided with leadership. And there's too much talk as well about the results of representative government. We've got representative government in this country. We all know what that means. But my understanding is that the vast majority of constituencies, never mind the total number of votes, the vast number of constituencies voted
Dennis,
for
we voted Brexit. We voted Brexit, Dennis. We voted Brexit. Dennis, I thank you for your call. Now, my next caller, interesting. Jason is calling me from Guildford. Now, Jason, I understand that you work for the European Union over the course of the last 12 years, but I understand that's no longer the case. You've had a bit of a problem with the European Commission this week, is that right?
That is absolutely correct, Nigel, and thank you for letting me to explain the story. I've been working for the Commission for 12 years. Over those 12 years, my role is to explain the financial statements to interpret of the Commission from junior civil servants right up to individuals that could be facing David Davis today in the Brexit negotiations.
Right. So you are a career EU bureaucrat, Jason, is that right?
No, not at all. I'm an external contractor who's an expert on interpreting the financial statements of the Commission. And in my presentation, I explained to them that the Commission accounts are insolvent by 60 billion euros, surprise, surprise, and that's a result of the pension deficit. We are one of 28 member states, but we're expected to completely pay off the 60 billion euros that they want, which is approximately 52 million sterling. So that's what
Now, these comments, Jason, you're making to me, is that why they said that you'd made inappropriate and repetitive references to Brexit, and as a direct consequence, the EU does not want you to continue as a trainer? So, is it...
Possibly.
So you're saying...
Statements, yes.
Yeah. I mean, what you're saying, Jason, is that because of the pension deficit, the EU's finances are very much worse than anybody publicly sort of understands and knows at this moment in time, yeah?
Correct. And we're expected, even though we're one of 28 members in the club, and we've been the second biggest contributor since 1972, and a majority of the 20 or 22 members have been net takers, because we want to leave, we're expected to completely cover the whole bill. I just don't understand that. Surely it's one of 28, if there is to be a bill. And that's my argument.
If there is to be a bill.
And my role at the Commission is to explain the financial statements factually. I'm not taking a political stance. I'm explaining them factually. And they are insolvent. I mean, I always look forward to the day when you could have attended my presentation, Nigel.
No, well, I wish I'd been allowed, you know. So, I mean, as you said, you were a contractor. Is that the end of the road for you in the European Commission?
Precisely. I've got no right of appeal, they've told me. I've emailed all the relevant officers that I can find. They've actually blocked my emails. They've just said they've come to that conclusion. They haven't sent me a proper reason and just said we don't want you anymore. Full stop.
Jason,
because you've referred to Brexit.
Jason, fascinating. Fascinating. What you've said raises a lot of questions, and I will, of course, say that we are going to contact the EU ourselves as LBC for a response, and if they want to put somebody on this show, I'll be very happy to talk to them. But Jason, I thank you for your explanation of the EU's finances as you see them, and I wish you well for the future. Thank you. Well, look, I've no reason, absolutely no reason, to disbelieve what's been said, and we did research it, and we've got letters from lawyers, etc., to sort of back up that what Jason is saying is true, and he is who he is. I wonder, if we assume Jason's right, could that be the reason they want so much money from us? Because they're in real trouble. James is calling me from Godstone in Surrey. James, good evening.
Hi, Nigel. I've got two main points to make, but since this thing, I've got one more. Don't keep drinking their champagne and running up the bills.
It's not me, James, I promise you. It's Juncker. It's Juncker. Since Juncker... go on.
2 points. One.
Yeah.
The government, and I feel sorry for Theresa May, because all the other parties are really getting up against it and making life difficult, right? Which we don't need, because Europe is difficult enough. That's the first point. The second, actually on that, Corbyn should not have been allowed to be in Brussels. I think that's totally wrong. The second point is, if we just say, right, you're not going to play ball, you're not going to negotiate, we are walking away. Within a month, they'll be back crawling, because, look, people talk about France selling us wine and things. Don't forget, I don't know how many cars there are on the road that are Citroens, Peugeots, Renaults.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. And Skodas, and the list goes on, absolutely.
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 Then you mention wine from Italy.
Yeah, well,
and everything
we do
else.
mention wine.
It's really...
But James, you said something at the start. I want to pick you up on very quickly. And you said you feel sorry for Theresa May. But surely the point about leaders is that we don't have to feel sorry for leaders. We have to respect leaders. We haven't even got to like leaders. And the reason you feel sorry for her is she's been trapped in on all sides, and she's not capable of being decisive, James, is she?
Well, who is? I mean, look, Labour have only got one person who might have some common sense, and that's Keir Starmer. They've got nobody else. Who the hell are they going to use to negotiate?
Well, that may be true. That may well be true, Dennis, but, I'm afraid the Prime Minister is not coming up to speed, in my view. James, thank you. And by the way, I tell you this, folks, I spoke today to one of the leading representatives of the Five Star Movement in Italy. They are leading the opinion polls with a general election just a few months down the track. And he said to me, we desperately want to continue with a free trade deal between us and the United Kingdom. Your market matters to us. You see, common sense out there in the member states, amongst European people, amongst companies, and here in Brussels, they're trying to destroy us. They really, really are. And we need a leader to stand up to them. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30. I'm in Brussels. There's a summit going on. 28 prime ministers and presidents from across Europe, and, of course, the European Commission and the European Council, at which they're meeting. And progress there is virtually none. And I'm asking you, what on earth does our Prime Minister need to do in order to break the deadlock? But the other big story that we've been covering, of course, over the last couple of weeks has been Catalonia. You remember what happened. They tried to hold a referendum. 900 people got injured when the Spanish government intervened. The European Union said nothing. I challenged Juncker very publicly in the Parliament, and they then said, the European Union, they thought necessary force had been used. Now, since then, of course, the Catalan president, Carles Puigdemont, sent a letter to the Prime Minister. He's saying we are independent, but we're prepared to talk about how it operates. But the Spanish government are responding. Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor, is back with me.
Yes, Nigel, the Catalan government has responded, and it's basically said that it intends to implement Article 155, which would in effect seize back Catalan autonomy. And that comes after they gave Carles Puigdemont 5 days to actually say whether he had declared independence. If you remember back to last Thursday, Mr. Puigdemont wanted to see some form of mediation. He appealed to the European Union to step in and try and broker some talks between the Catalan authorities and the government in Madrid.
But they wouldn't do that, would they?
They wouldn't do that, no. Well, what's interesting is now, of course, we're at this European Council summit. Donald Tusk, the president of the European Council, has just stood up within the last few moments, and he said this: there's no hiding that the situation in Spain is concerning. We have, all of us, I think, our own evaluations, opinions, assessments, but formally speaking, there's no space for the EU interventions here. Yeah. That's the key. And basically, he's washing his hands of it, doesn't want anything to do with it. And now the big question is, are we going to see the sorts of scenes that we saw when that referendum was carried out? Or worse, with the Spanish government sending in military police from those boats that they've moored off the coast of Barcelona or Tarragona.
Which we've been warning people about on this show. Yeah.
Send them in, and we could see, and when I was speaking to members of the CUP party that had campaigned for independence, they were worried that you would see them, those military police, come in and literally take control of the Catalan parliament in the middle of Barcelona.
And we've already had some senior figures in prison this week, haven't we?
Yes, there have been 2 senior figures put in prison. They've had their applications for bail rejected, and of course, at the time this was happening, a spokesman for the Spanish government warned that Carles Puigdemont could suffer the same fate as Luis Companys, who was in effect, he was put to death by General Franco in 1940 by firing squad, and he warned. This spokesman warned that Carles Puigdemont could go to. I don't remember the exact same turn of phrase.
Nice,
but there may be the same suffer the same fate. Never mind. The European Union isn't stepping in, and it'll be a big question as to where that mediation comes from and whether we see the same violence.
If this continues, there will be an up-to-date Prague Spring. If they send those troops and those police in and take over control of government buildings, it will be the modern-day Prague Spring. And isn't it funny? When Alex Salmond and co were fighting a campaign to take Scotland out of the United Kingdom, everybody here thought it was wonderful. Big speeches being made about the rights of the Scots, and wouldn't it be wonderful if Scotland was an independent country? Oh, and a member of the European Union. And now we have Catalonian separatism that genuinely wants to separate not just from Spain, but from the European Union too. Oh, it's all very different this time, isn't it? Not pretty. Theo, thank you very much indeed. So, back to the question, what does Mrs May need to do to break this horrid, hopeless, awful deadlock? Rob is my next caller from Watford. Rob, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are we?
Well, do you know what, Rob? As somebody who fought so hard for Brexit, I'm really, really frustrated, but also angry that we have a Prime Minister who gave great big speeches about Brexit meaning Brexit and is now doing, well, what is she doing, Rob?
Well, unfortunately, this is what happens when people just do meaningless sound bites that mean nothing. I mean, the reason that we're not moved on to trade yet, because if you remember at the very start of this whole thing, the first meeting between Davis and Juncker, they both agreed and signed off to it. There was 3 things that they were going to sort out before they moved on to trade. Off the top of my head, I think that was the Irish border, the so-called divorce bill, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think the third thing might have been the
citizens' rights.
European,
citizens' rights.
Yeah, exactly. So both sides.
But Rob, that was the agenda. But that was the agenda, Rob. That was the agenda that Juncker set, and for some reason the British government agreed to.
Yeah, they did agree to it, but like I said, it was signed and agreed. That was a deal. Once that's sorted out, then they can move on to trade. So I don't know who's hanging this one out, but Those three things haven't been met, so therefore we can't move on to the trade.
But when we try to meet them, Rob, when the Prime Minister said, look, we'll have a 2-year transition, we'll pay you another 20 billion, and then we're told that's peanuts, it's almost as if, Rob, whatever we do, however much Theresa appeases them, they still want more. And they've been in charge of this process right from the start. Isn't now the moment for her to do something really very dramatic?
But the problem is, again, you've got her saying one thing, you've got Boris saying something else, you've got Amber Rudd saying something else.
I know.
The problem is, they never had a plan, unfortunately. That was the problem. They didn't have a plan. And these guys, like I said, European Union, it's 27 against 1. They had their stuff sorted. They had their plan.
Yeah, they did.
Printed out on the internet.
Well,
we were just...
Rob, my idea, Rob, is either she sacks all the Remainers in the cabinet, or she sacks all the Leavers in the cabinet, and at least we know what direction this government's actually going in.
But I think, again, it's because this has never been done. No one knows what to expect and stuff. That's the problem, you know. I mean, I think it's madness to think that you can split up, 42 years of deal with all this stuff in 2 years.
Do you know what, Rob?
Sorry.
You know, when Churchill took over the leadership of the country in 1940, no one knew what to expect. Things looked grim, but at least there was total, direct leadership. It could have ended in disaster, but it didn't. We need leadership. On Twitter, I get, no price is too high for the EU to overturn Brexit, yeah? And that price may well be a price their own citizens pay. And on Facebook, I get, Tony says to me, moggy, 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 mog, mog, mog. I mean, it's as if any problem that appears, any difficulty in the world, there's a number of you out there that think that Jacob Rees-Mogg could solve all of it. Well, here's something, Tony, that you'll like and could be a bit of fun, because next Monday, from 10 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Jacob Rees-Mogg will be standing in for James O'Brien, who is away. So Mogg is going to be doing his own show on LBC next Monday, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And Tony, I'm sure he'd be thrilled if you were one of his callers. Prudence is calling me from Woking. She's a new caller to the show. Prudence, good evening.
Good evening to you. Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Hello. My stance is that the Conservative Party are neither strong nor stable. That was their election campaign, strong and stable.
Strong and stable leadership, absolutely.
No, totally. I'd call them weak and wobbly. We've got Boris Johnson turning on. We've got Amber Rudd. They are the most wackiest, most weak party. They're making Europe, making us a laughing stock within Europe. And I know you're not going to be keen on this, but I say Jeremy Corbyn, vote of no confidence to the Conservative Party, give Jeremy a chance to give us a chance at getting some access to some good deals and some good negotiations. I would love a vote of no confidence. I have no confidence in Theresa May.
Well, that may happen, Prudence. I mean, that may well happen. And what's clear now from today, when they treated Corbyn like a rock star here, because of course he's totally reneged on everything he stood for on Europe in the general election. They like him now. You know, he got elected. He got 40% of the vote saying that free movement would end, we'd leave the single market. He's turned his back on all of it. But Prudence, do you honestly think that if Jeremy Corbyn was our Prime Minister and he came to Brussels and said, look, I'll tell you what, however bad this deal is, I'm going to accept it. That's where I start this negotiation. But please be nice to us. Do you really think, Prudence, he'd get anything in our benefit with that position?
I sure think he's got more people skills than Theresa May holds whatsoever. The one point I make is she says we're doing great with the negotiations so far. All the other parts of the EU earlier on in the week said we've made no progress. She's a complete liar.
Oh gosh, that's a bit strong.
Yeah, well, no, she is. The U-turns, she's gone back.
Do you see any good qualities in our Prime Minister, Prudence?
No, but none at all. None at all whatsoever. I have no faith in her.
Right, thank you, Prudence. Very clear what Prudence thinks. She thinks Corbyn's the guy, but Corbyn not only has turned his backs on his own voters, but his negotiating position would be useless, unless, of course, he just would want, with the Labour Party, to keep us effectively as full members of this union. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:46. While we ponder what Mrs May needs to say at the dinner that will take place tonight, and I've no doubt it will be fine whining and dining, but what does she need to do or say to break the deadlock? But before that, in the USA, having a go at Trump isn't something limited, of course, to the Democrat Party. Many establishment Republicans enjoy doing the same. And today, it's George W. Bush's turn. Yes, he has stood up and effectively slammed Trumpism. He said our politics seems more vulnerable to conspiracy theories and outright fabrication. That's right. George W. Bush said this, the man who peddled and fabricated the most harmful conspiracy theory of modern times, namely that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, which led to a very costly war in terms of lives and in terms of money, and did its very best to help kickstart ISIS. He also left office with an approval rating nearly as low as that of Nixon after Watergate, and he really is my hypocrite of the week, but I'm sure Donald will survive. What does Mrs May have to do? I'm going to ask Pat in Salisbury. Pat, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Great to talk to you. I'm a big admirer of you and all you've done for the UK.
Well, that's kind of you, Pat, but whatever I've done, where do we go? Where do we go from here, Pat, with this leader?
Leader, I don't believe she's serious about this at all. She's saying, I believe she's just saying she's trying to do the best for Britain, but I look at her body language and it's a giveaway. It's when she met Donald Tusk a few weeks ago, her body language towards him was very warm and, you know, my best mate sort of body language.
Yeah.
The same with Juncker. Mr. Juncker, the same. And his body language, it gives away. I know if you were fighting for Britain, you wouldn't be warmly welcoming Mr. Tusk, etc.
No, I wouldn't be, would I?
I know, it'd be pretty cool, you know, and that's what you do when you're negotiating with somebody.
Yeah. So do you think, Pat, if she completely flunks this summit, which she's going to, and if she sort of hangs on for another few weeks, does there come a point when the Conservative sceptics, and bear in mind, we've had former Chancellors of the Exchequer, former Cabinet Ministers today saying, look, enough's enough, let's just walk away and go for the World Trade Organization option. Does there come a point, Pat, where this directly, as I think it may, would threaten her leadership?
Possibly. I don't think about this, but what I think the British people have got to, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think she's serious about getting a good deal. And another giveaway was the Florence speech a few weeks ago, where she said, "Oh, the transition period could be a bit longer." You know, you don't. At this point in negotiations early on, you don't say that. You say that at the end.
Yeah, Pat, you've got it right. You've got it right. She's not a negotiator. I get a very impassioned text coming in from Philip in Surrey, who says she will do nothing. She couldn't negotiate her way out of a paper bag. Send someone who understands what the assets of the EU are and what our share of them is. As for Mr. Corbyn, he is a traitor. He is hurting the UK. I have voted Labour all my life, but with Corbyn, never again. So you see, the Parliamentary Labour Party are putting on this united front. Oh, and by the way, I was having coffee this morning and had a nice chat with David Miliband. Yes, we were at Heathrow Airport, had a nice chat with David Miliband. And, of course, the David Miliband wing of the party, the Parliamentary Party, they think it's great that we should stay part of a single market, customs union, and all the rest of it. But there are 3.5 to 4 million Labour voters out there who voted Brexit who are not going to be happy with what Corbyn is up to. I've got a call from Arlen, from Cork. David, good evening.
Nigel, how are you?
I'm very well. So what's the view from there, David, about our Prime Minister and Brexit?
It's a bit, well, the mainstream media very pro-EU.
Yes.
However, I was at a breakfast briefing a couple of weeks ago, and Minister Simon Coveney was there, who's the Minister in charge of looking after Ireland's affairs around Brexit, was very concerned, very, very concerned. I think at this stage now, I mean, a couple of things you mentioned earlier was the possible backbench challenge. Where do you see that coming from? Who do you think is a realistic person?
Well, David, it needs 48 signatures to be received by the chairman of the 1922 committee to trigger a leadership process. And I just thought that what you saw today, front page of a Telegraph, significant figures in the Tory party saying, we're just wasting our time with this. We're losing opportunities in the world. I'm just not sure, David, that the real Eurosceptics in the Tory party are going to put up with much more of this.
Yeah, I'd agree. I would agree. And I think we're getting to the stage now where, as I said, living in the Republic of Ireland, I've seen the way the European Union has behaved towards Ireland when there was a financial crash and, there was a puppet government, blah, blah, blah. And even with the Lisbon referendum, the mainstream media certainly believe, that there's
pure thuggery.
Yes.
Threatening everybody, outspending everybody. No, it's been disgraceful. David, do you see any hope for the Brexit negotiations with her as leader?
Unfortunately, no. I wanted her to do well. I have two small children, both girls, and I wanted her to do well. Thought it'd be good for them to see a strong female leader, and it's just, it seems to be that the more I keep giving her, the more benefit of the doubt you give her, each time you hear her say something, you just lose more belief, I think.
Yeah, more and more faith. I agree, David, and thank you for listening from Ireland. Pleasure to have you on the show. Chris from Twickenham is calling. Chris, good evening.
Hi, Nigel. How's it going?
Well, I'm frustrated, Chris. How do you feel about the Brexit negotiations?
Yeah, I feel pretty frustrated too. I think, to be honest, Theresa May has become the elephant in the room now. She's got a complete lack of real leadership qualities. She seems to have a lack of direction and a lack of kind of any idea of what she actually wants. And I think she's the main issue that is holding everything up at the moment. We can't negotiate our way out of the EU if our leader does not really know what they want.
Well, I think that's right. And I think, Chris, the big problem is she's holding together a cabinet who've got these completely opposite views. And that's how you govern. You govern because you always have splits in parties. But this isn't just another issue. This is the biggest, most fundamental decision this country has taken in hundreds of years. And we've got to have a leader who's clear and a cabinet who's united. And, Chris, you're a first-time caller to the show. Is it your frustration that made you pick up the phone?
It is, yeah. I mean, I'm just getting more and more frustrated as we seem to carry on day by day. We think thinking things are going to get better, but while Theresa May is our leader, while Theresa May is head of Conservative Party, nothing is going to change and nothing's going to go further because in the back of everybody's heads is that, is the fact that nobody really wants her to be there anymore, and that is at the back of
I'm afraid
mind.
That's right. That's right. Chris, I thank you. I'm going to squeeze in Dave in Coventry, who again is a new caller. Dave, you haven't got long. Give us your point.
Nigel, good evening.
Hi.
I believe the EU are just a playground bully. While Theresa May and her government appear weak, they will continue to act like that. What I believe she needs to do is give them a deadline and tell them, while we're waiting for that deadline to come, we will begin negotiations elsewhere around the world.
With America, Australia, Canada,
everywhere.
India, absolutely.
Wherever we want, because we are in charge of ourselves. And as for Corbyn, for him to rock up there like a rock star, he wouldn't even talk about the EU in his conference.
I know. But he's now... but see, now, Dave, it suits. Because if the EU can help with the aid of a Tory Europhiles to bring down the government, to force a general election, then he'd be very happy. Dave, I'm sorry we didn't have long. I thank you very much indeed for that. My final thought on this is the days of Theresa the Appeaser need to end and need to end now. It's unacceptable that Mr. Corbyn is brought here, that these people are trying to split our country, to destroy the whole Brexit process. Enough is enough, Theresa. Stand up tonight at this dinner. Have a glass of wine first if you need to. After all, we've paid for a lot of it already, and tell them what you think. Give them a deadline. Otherwise, we're just going to lose, lose, lose. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock from London. Tonight at 10, it'll be Ian Collins. But up next, it's Clive Bull.